My name is Elena Marsh, and I am 31 years old. For 4 years, my younger sister told our mother a version of my life that was almost entirely fiction. That I had been cold to her during her divorce. That I had said cruel things about her parenting. That I had called our mother manipulative behind her back. My mother believed her. Every time, 2 weeks ago, I sat in my mother's kitchen and played her a voicemail my sister had left me 11 months earlier. One she had forgotten I still had, where she said, word for word, the exact opposite of everything she had been telling our mother for years. My mother's face changed in a way I had never seen before. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your city and the time where you are watching from. I love reading every single one. Let me take you back to the year everything started shifting. And the sister? I thought I understood. I grew up in a small house outside Tulsa with my mother, Joan, and my younger sister, Becca, 4 years behind me. Our father left when I was 9 and Becca was 5. And my mother raised us largely on her own, working 2 jobs for most of my childhood. A woman whose exhaustion I did not fully understand the depth of until I became an adult myself. I became, almost by default, the responsible one. I watched Becca after school. I helped with homework. I barely understood myself. I learned to cook simple dinners by the time I was 11 because someone needed to. And my mother was rarely home before 7. Becca and I were close in the particular way siblings are close when they have had to rely on each other more than 2 children typically should. We fought, the way sisters fight, but underneath it there was something solid, or at least something I believed was solid. I left for college at 18. Becca stayed closer to home, attending community college while living with our mother. A choice that kept the 2 of them in much closer daily contact than I maintained from 3 states away. I did not realize, for years, how much that proximity would eventually matter. Becca married young, at 22, to a man named Derek, who I never fully trusted. Though I kept most of my reservations to myself out of respect for her own judgment about her own life, the marriage struggled almost from the beginning. Becca called me periodically during those years, late at night, crying about arguments, about Derek's drinking, about a relationship that seemed to be slowly grinding her down. I listened. I offered what support I could from a distance. I occasionally suggested counseling, suggested she consider what she actually wanted long-term, the kind of careful, sisterly advice you give when you are trying not to overstep, but also cannot watch someone you love struggle without saying anything at all. She divorced Derek when she was 27. The divorce was difficult, financially and emotionally, and I flew home twice during that period specifically to help her through the worst of it. Taking time off work I genuinely could not easily spare. I believed, at the time, that this period had brought us closer together. I believed wrong, in ways I would not understand for several more years. I want to walk through, specifically, how the distortion started, because the gradual nature of it is part of what made it so difficult to recognize. It began, as far as I can reconstruct it now, during the divorce itself. Becca was staying with our mother for several months during the worst of the proceedings, and the 2 of them were in close daily contact. In a way, I, 3 states away, simply was not. I do not know exactly what Becca told our mother during those months, in real time, as things were happening. What I know is what I eventually pieced together, years later, about the gap between what I actually said and did during that period, and what our mother came to believe I had said and done, according to conversations I had much later with my mother. Becca had told her, during the divorce, that I had been distant and judgmental, that I had told her she was, quote, making a mess of her life, that I had been more critical than supportive during one of the hardest periods of her adult life. This was, almost entirely, the opposite of what had actually happened. I had flown home twice. I had spent considerable money I did not easily have to help with legal fees. I had listened to hours of difficult phone calls without once, as far as I could recall, suggesting she was making a mess of anything. I did not know, for nearly 2 years after the divorce, that any of this distortion was occurring. My relationship with my mother during this period grew steadily, subtly colder, in ways I attributed to distance, to busyness, to the normal drift that sometimes happens between adult children and aging parents. I noticed, gradually, that phone calls with my mother had a different texture than they used to, slightly guarded. Occasionally, she would reference something I supposedly said or did that I genuinely did not recognize, and I would correct it, Confused, assuming a simple miscommunication rather than a pattern, she would usually drop the subject quickly when I corrected her. The way you drop a subject when you are not entirely sure what to believe, but do not want to pursue it further in the moment. I did not understand, at the time, that these small moments of confusion were not isolated. They were accumulating slowly into an entire alternate narrative my mother was constructing about who I actually was. The pattern became impossible to ignore. During my mother's 60th birthday, 3 years ago, I flew home for the celebration, a relatively small gathering at Becca's house, perhaps 15 people, family and a few close friends. During the dinner, my mother made a comment, lightly, almost in passing, about how nice it was that I had finally found time to visit. Given how busy I apparently was avoiding family obligations, I asked her, genuinely confused, what she meant by avoiding family obligations. I had visited 4 times in the past year alone, more than I had visited in any previous year of my adult life, she said. Carefully, that Becca had mentioned, I found these visits exhausting, that I had said something about preferring my own life in the city too. Quote, dealing with all of this, I looked at Becca, who was suddenly very focused on refilling someone's water glass at the other end of the table. I told my mother I had never said anything close to that. I told her I genuinely did not understand where that idea had come from. My mother's expression suggested she did not entirely believe me. She believed, more easily, the version Becca had apparently been building for years. I confronted Becca directly after the party, in her kitchen. While she was loading the dishwasher, and clearly hoping I would not bring it up, I asked her plainly, why? Our mother seemed to believe I had said things about family visits that I had never actually said. Becca's response was immediate, defensive, and looking back, revealing in ways I did not fully appreciate at the time. She said she did not know what I was talking about, that maybe Mom had simply misunderstood something she had mentioned in passing, that I was reading too much into a small comment. I let it go that evening, partly because confronting it further felt disproportionate to what still seemed at the time like a possible misunderstanding rather than a deliberate pattern. I did not yet understand the scale of what had actually been happening. The pattern repeated, with increasing specificity. Over the following years, my mother would mention something I had supposedly said about her parenting, about her choices, about Becca's life decisions, and each time when I traced the comment back, it led to something Becca had apparently told her, attributed to me, that I had never actually said. I told my mother, repeatedly, that these things were not accurate, that I did not recognize the version of myself she was describing. Each time, she would soften slightly, seem briefly uncertain, and then, within weeks, the underlying belief would resurface in some new form, as though my direct denials simply could not compete with whatever Becca was telling her in person. Consistently over time, I began to understand, slowly, painfully, that I was losing a kind of credibility, war I had not realized I was fighting. Becca had daily, in-person access to our mother. I had occasional phone calls and infrequent visits. Proximity, repeated consistently over years, was outperforming truth, stated occasionally and from a distance. I did not know, during most of this period, exactly why Becca was doing this. I genuinely did not understand the motivation, only the accumulating damage. I eventually understood the motivation roughly 18 months ago. During a particularly difficult financial period in Becca's life, she had remarried to a man named Patrick, and the marriage was struggling financially almost from the start. Patrick's business had failed the previous year, and the two of them were navigating significant debt. My mother, during this period, began offering Becca financial help with increasing frequency. Money for rent, money for a car repair, money that, as far as I could tell from occasional comments, was straining my mother's own retirement savings in ways that genuinely worried me. I asked my mother, carefully, during one phone call, whether she had considered the long-term impact of this level of ongoing support on her own financial security. My mother's response surprised me. She said Becca needed her more than I did, that Becca had always struggled more, that I had, quote, made my own way without needing anyone's help. The implication being that I therefore deserved less concern, less support, less of whatever finite resource of maternal attention and assistance existed between us. I understood, in that conversation for the first time clearly, that Becca's years of subtle distortion had not been random cruelty. They had been laying groundwork slowly, consistently, for a version of our family dynamic in which she was the perpetually struggling daughter deserving of support, and I was the cold, distant, financially comfortable daughter who needed nothing and, by extension, deserved correspondingly less consideration. I want to be specific about the voicemail, because it became the single piece of evidence that eventually changed everything. 11 months before the conversation in my mother's kitchen, Becca had called me late one night, considerably more honest than she typically was during this period. Likely because she had been drinking and her usual careful narrative management had loosened, she left a voicemail when I did not answer, rambling slightly emotional, talking about how guilty she felt about the things she had been telling our mother over the years, about how she knew it was not entirely fair to me, about how she justified it to herself because she felt our mother had always favored me growing up, even though, she said specifically, she knew that was not really true and that I had actually been the one who raised her. In a lot of ways our mother could not, she said, word for word, in that voicemail. I know I've made you look worse than you are. I know it's not fair. I just get so angry sometimes that everyone thinks you're the good one. I listened to that voicemail at the time, sat with it for several days, uncertain what to do with it. I did not confront her immediately. I genuinely was not certain, in that moment, how to even begin that conversation. I saved the voicemail. I did not delete it. I am not entirely sure, looking back, whether I saved it deliberately as evidence, or simply because deleting difficult things has never come easily to me. 11 months passed. The pattern with our mother continued, unchanged. As though that moment of honesty from Becca had never happened at all, the conversation in my mother's kitchen happened 2 weeks ago. During what was meant to be an ordinary Sunday visit, my mother mentioned, almost casually while making tea, that Becca had told her I had been short with her on the phone recently, dismissive about her financial struggles, suggesting she needed to, quote, figure her own life out instead of relying on others. I had not spoken to Becca about her finances in over 3 months. I had certainly never said anything resembling what my mother had just described. I told my mother, plainly, that this had not happened, the way I had told her many similar things over the preceding 3 years, fully expecting the same pattern of brief uncertainty followed by eventual reabsorption of Becca's version. But something in me, that particular afternoon, after 3 years of this same exhausting cycle, decided I was finished simply denying things verbally and hoping, eventually, the truth would somehow accumulate enough weight on its own to matter. I took out my phone. I found the voicemail. I told my mother there was something she needed to actually hear, not just take my word for. I played the voicemail at full volume on the kitchen counter. My mother stood very still while Becca's voice, slightly slurred, emotional, unmistakably hers, said the words she had apparently never expected anyone but me to ever hear. I know I've made you look worse than you are. I know it's not fair. I just get so angry sometimes that everyone thinks you're the good one. The voicemail continued for another 30 seconds. Becca elaborating, in that unguarded moment, on specific things she had told our mother that she now, in this moment of honesty, acknowledged were not entirely true. I watched my mother's face throughout. I had genuinely never seen that particular expression on her before. Somewhere between shock and a kind of dawning, painful recalculation. The look of someone realizing, all at once, that years of an entire emotional framework had been built on a foundation that had just been revealed as fundamentally unstable. She asked me, when the voicemail ended, why I had never played this for her before. I told her the truth. I told her I had not known, 11 months ago, how to have this conversation, and that I had spent 3 years hoping she would simply believe me without needing audio evidence to make my own daughter's word sufficient on its own. My mother called Becca that same evening. I do not know everything that was said during that call, but I know it lasted nearly 2 hours, considerably longer than their typical conversations. Becca called me the following day, her voice noticeably different from our usual interactions, careful, somewhat hollow. The voice of someone who has just had a foundation she relied on for years abruptly removed. She asked how long I had had the voicemail. I told her 11 months. She asked why I had not used it sooner. I told her I had genuinely hoped, for most of that time, that I would not need to. That some part of me kept believing our mother would eventually simply trust me without requiring proof. Becca was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised me, given the pattern of the previous several years. She said, I think I started believing my own version of things too. I'm not even sure anymore where the lying stopped, and I started actually thinking it was true. I do not know if that statement represents genuine insight or simply another, more sophisticated form of the same self-protective narrative she had been constructing for years. I have learned, over this entire experience, to be considerably more careful about which version of Becca's statements I choose to fully believe. My mother and I have had several long conversations. In the 2 weeks since that afternoon in her kitchen, she has acknowledged, more directly than I expected, that she allowed proximity and frequency to substitute for actual verification. That she believed Becca's version of events for years simply because Becca was physically present more often, telling the story more consistently, while I was 3 states away, occasionally and quietly correcting a narrative I did not fully understand was being built against me. She has not fully resolved what this means for her relationship with Becca going forward. I do not think she has fully processed yet the scale of what she now understands she believed for years. I have told her clearly that I am not interested in some kind of victory over my sister, that I would genuinely prefer a family where this kind of distortion simply stops occurring, rather than one where I have successfully proven myself right at Becca's expense. What I am interested in, going forward, is a relationship with my mother that does not require audio evidence to establish basic credibility about my own life and my own words. Becca and I have spoken twice since that day. Careful, somewhat strained conversations that bear little resemblance to the closeness we shared as children, watching out for each other in a house where our mother worked 2 jobs to keep us fed. I do not know if that closeness is fully recoverable. I genuinely hope it is, though I have learned through this entire experience not to assume outcomes simply because I want them. I think often about how slowly this entire distortion built, how each individual instance seemed small enough to dismiss, how it took years of accumulated small fabrications before the gap between reality and my mother's belief about me became wide enough to actually notice. I think, too, about how close I came to simply continuing to absorb that gap indefinitely, correcting it quietly and individually each time it surfaced, never quite escalating to the point of producing actual proof. Until 11 months of carrying a voicemail I was not certain I would ever use finally tipped into a decision to stop simply hoping the truth would be enough on its own. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes you need the actual recording. That is my story. If you have ever had to prove something true that should have simply been believed on your word alone, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. And if this story reminded you that proximity and consistency can sometimes outweigh truth, until truth finally gets the chance to speak for itself, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. I will see you in the next one.